a valley filled with dry bones. No voices, no breath, only ashes and forgotten memories of life. And then a voice from heaven thundered, "Son of man, can these bones live?" A sacred wind rose from the four corners, and right in the midst of death, an army stood to its feet. Have you ever felt like your soul was as dry as those bones? Don't look away. Don't skip this. Watch until the end. God will bless you. In the shadowed corridors of Israel's history, during the bleak days of Babylonian exile, hope had become a ghost. The people of God wandered in foreign lands, their temple reduced to ashes, their faith fractured. Jerusalem lay in ruins. The sacred songs of Zion had faded into silence. Among the exiled was a priest named Ezekiel, chosen not in glory, but in brokenness. God had not forgotten his covenant. In the stillness of despair, he spoke not with thunder, but with vision. To Ezekiel, he entrusted messages laced with mystery, judgment, and redemption. One such vision would shake the boundaries between death and life. It was a prophecy steeped in holy dread, the valley of dry bones. The Spirit of the Lord carried Ezekiel to a desolate valley. The ground was not just dry, it was cursed. Scattered across the dust were bones, dry bleached silent. They were not buried, but exposed, as if history itself had vomited up its dead. Then came the voice of the Almighty, "Son of man, can these bones live?" It was not just a question. It was an invitation, a test of faith, a confrontation with the impossible. Ezekiel, trembling yet obedient, replied, "O sovereign Lord, you alone know." Not presumption, not fear, but reverence. Then the Lord said, "Prophesy to these bones." And he did. As the words of prophecy fell from his lips, the valley shook. A sound, a rattling, echoed in the dust. Bones found bones. Tendons ran stretched. Flesh formed. Skin sealed the lifeless forms. But they did not breathe. Still corpses. Still cold. Then the Lord said, "Prophesy to the breath." From the four winds it came ruach, spirit, breath, life, and the breath entered them. One by one, the bodies stirred, eyes opened, chests rose. They stood not as scattered survivors, but as an army, alive, awakened, redeemed. That vision was not only a spectacle of resurrection, it was a declaration of divine power. Israel, though broken and buried in shame, would live again not by might nor by merit, but by the Spirit of the living God. This valley was more than landscape. It was a mirror to the soul, a place where death meets the promise of breath, a battlefield where despair is undone by divine whisper. In the stillness of the valley, where death had long ruled, one divine command tore through the silence like a blade of light in a cave of shadows. God told Ezekiel prophecy to these dry bones. Declare that he would breathe breath into them, attach tendons, bring flesh upon them, and cover them with skin. But this was a mere physical reassembly. It was a sacred act, a supernatural gesture signifying the spiritual resurrection of a nation. As Ezekiel obeyed, a transformation, both eerie and holy, began to unfold. The bones began to tremble. They clicked. They scraped. They moved toward one another with terrifying precision, each bone finding its partner, sockets locking into joints, ribs rising from the dust. Tendons appeared like vines of muscle memory. Flesh rewrapped the skeletons. Skin stretched across the frames like new scrolls waiting to be written upon. But there was no breath in them. They were bodies perfectly formed, yet completely still. No heartbeat, no spark. Lifeless, like statues of war fallen in time's forgotten war zone. Form had returned, but spirit had not. Then the voice came again. Prophesy to the breath. Call it from the four winds. Call the Ruach, the holy breath, the same spirit that hovered over the waters of creation, the same breath that once surged into Adam's lungs at Eden's birth. So Ezekiel spoke to the winds, and the winds came slowly, powerfully, sacred. The breath entered them, and the unthinkable happened. The bodies twitched. Chests heaved. Eyes flew open, eyes that had not seen for generations. They stood, not crawling, not limping, standing, upright, alive, whole. They were not just survivors. They were soldiers. A great army, risen from the bones of despair. This vision was not for spectacle. It was a holy revelation, a divine announcement that death is not the end when God is not done. These bones were the people of Israel, exiled, broken, scattered like ashes across centuries of sorrow. But the Lord had not forgotten his covenant. He had not abandoned his name. He would restore them, body, soul, and spirit. And that promise did not die in the dust of ancient Babylon. It speaks still across time into every soul that feels cut off, lifeless, or hollow. The same God who breathed life into a valley of bones can breathe again into you. He whispers, "My spirit is still moving. My breath can revive what you thought was beyond resurrection." This valley was not merely a place. It was a mirror, a reflection of the soul, of every heart that has felt too dry, too late, too dead to rise again. But in this sacred battlefield, despair was undone by divine breath. Death bowed to prophecy, and silence made way for life. After the miraculous revival of the dry bones, the valley was no longer what it had been. What had once been a field of decay and finality now stood filled with a mighty host, upright, breathing alive. And yet, even in this resurrection, a heavy silence hung in the air, not the silence of death, but of something still unsaid, a sacred pause. Ezekiel stood among the risen, a prophet surrounded by breathing testimonies of power, yet his heart was weighted with more than awe. This vision was not only a display of divine strength, it was a sacred parable whispering the spiritual condition of an entire nation. The bones, dry, scattered, stripped of life, were a symbol of Israel's despair, a people cut off from their covenant, from their identity, and from the God who once called them his own. Then the voice of the Lord echoed once more, this time deeper, as though it rumbled from the graves themselves. Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, "Our bones are dried up. Our hope is lost. We are completely cut off." Therefore, prophesy and say to them, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel." This was not merely a promise of physical return. It was a declaration of spiritual rebirth. God vowed not just to restore their place, but to restore their soul, to breathe his spirit into them again, and reawaken what had long been buried. Graves would open, the forgotten would rise, and they would return not just home, but renewed. The image of opened graves is not one of horror here. It is a metaphor of holy redemption, a picture of how no depth is beyond God's reach, no darkness too suffocating for his breath to enter. Ezekiel's vision became a timeless prophecy. It was not bound to the past. It speaks now to every soul who has felt exiled in despair, to every heart that believes its best days are buried, to every faith that once burned but now flickers like a dying wick. This is not just Israel's resurrection. It is ours. God is still whispering through the graves, "If I can raise an army from bones, I can raise you from your silence, from your grief, from your forgotten hope." The valley was never just a place. It was a mirror, a sacred space where death was defied, and breath once again proved stronger than the tomb. After the haunting vision of the valley of dry bones, the voice of the Lord came again to Ezekiel, not with thunder this time, but with sacred instruction. A new symbolic act was to be performed, one that would speak louder than words, even through generations. "Son of man, take a stick and write on it, for Judah and the Israelites associated with him. Then take another stick and write on it, for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel associated with him." God then instructed Ezekiel to join the two sticks together in his hand, so they would become one, a single staff, a unified piece of wood in the grasp of a prophet. This act held deep prophetic significance. It was a symbol of reconciliation, of reunion between what had long been divided, Judah, the southern kingdom, and Israel, the northern kingdom, led by Ephraim, long since scattered and estranged. This division had lasted for centuries, a rift born from rebellion and sin after the reign of Solomon. The house of Israel had fractured not just politically, but spiritually, and now with two sticks in one hand, Ezekiel stood as a living prophecy that the hand of God could restore what human failure had shattered. The people, puzzled, asked what it meant. Ezekiel answered with a voice not his own, but filled with divine authority. "This is what the sovereign Lord says: I will take the people of Israel from among the nations. I will gather them and bring them back into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. There will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or divided into two kingdoms. But this was more than political reunification. This was spiritual cleansing, covenantal renewal, and identity rebirth. God promised He would cleanse them from their sins. He would remove their idols. He would restore them as His people and place His sanctuary in their midst forever. This was not just about location. It was about presence. The presence of God dwelling among His people as in the days of Eden, holy, eternal, uninterrupted. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Ezekiel 37:26-27. The vision of the 2 sticks was a divine declaration. Division is not final. Rebellion is not irreversible. The God who breathes life into bones also binds hearts once torn apart. Even today, in a world fractured by ideologies, borders, denominations, and fears, the hand of God still holds the power to bring 2 sticks together, to heal what we thought was lost forever. He is not only the God of resurrection, He is the God of restoration. He does not just revive bones. He unites kingdoms. He heals families. He reconciles the divided. The vision of the 2 sticks joined into one was not merely about political reunification. It was a divine proclamation of a new covenant, a covenant of peace. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. This covenant was not grounded in the fragile fidelity of man, but in the unshakable faithfulness of God. It marked the transformation of Israel's history from rebellion, division, and exile to a future rooted in holiness, unity, and belonging. Then came a deeper promise, one that trembled through the bones of prophecy. My dwelling place shall be with them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. This vow rekindled a sacred longing buried in Israel's collective memory, that God would once again dwell among His people as He did in the cloud and fire in the wilderness, as He did when glory filled Solomon's temple. But this time, the promise was not about proximity. It was about eternal indwelling, a relationship no longer disrupted by betrayal, but forged in permanence. This covenant looked ahead to something greater, deeper, a new covenant where the law would be written on hearts, where the Spirit would live within, and worship would no longer reside in temples of stone, but rise from the altar of the soul. In this covenant of peace, God reaffirmed His identity as the one who sanctifies. Israel's transformation would become a living testimony to the nations, not of their greatness, but of God's redeeming power. No longer would they be mocked as exiles. They would stand as a lamp among the nations, reflecting His justice, mercy, and glory. This covenant became a lighthouse of hope, shining across the chasm from despair to restoration, from shame to reconciliation, from defilement to divine presence. I will set my sanctuary among them forevermore. These words were not metaphor. They were a divine seal that God's purposes cannot be undone. His people will live in peace beneath the covering of an everlasting covenant, where there is no more distance, no more division, only presence and breath. After the vision of the two sticks becoming one, the voice of the Lord thundered again, a promise stretching beyond time. My servant David shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. This wasn't simply about monarchy or political governance. It was a sacred commitment to complete spiritual leadership. The name David did not only recall Israel's greatest earthly king, it foreshadowed one to come a shepherd king who would lead with righteousness, humility, and mercy. The image of the shepherd was woven deeply into Israel's soul. Shepherds were defenders, guides, caretakers. They knew each sheep by name. The sheep knew their voice. It was a relationship built on closeness, trust, and tender knowing. But this promise didn't stop at leadership. It expanded into something far deeper, a moral and spiritual transformation of the people themselves. They shall walk in my rules and be careful to obey my statutes, not because they were forced, not because of fear, but because their hearts were healed, because the covenant had been restored, because the relationship had been mended. Then the Lord added, "They shall dwell in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, where your fathers lived. They and their children and their children's children shall dwell there forever." This wasn't just about coming back. This was about coming home, a promise of a forever homeland, not only in soil, but in spirit, a place where the soul remembers its name and the body rests under divine protection. And all of it was sealed with one breathtaking declaration: I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant. Peace here meant more than the absence of war. It meant wholeness, healing, a holy serenity that touched every corner of life. It was a divine pledge that God would dwell, guard, guide, and never depart. Finally, the Lord's voice echoed with the seal of all the promises. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. This was the heartbeat of it all. God's living presence among his people, a bond that could not be severed, a love that would outlive generations, a relationship reborn not by blood, but by spirit and covenant. Through Ezekiel, the Lord unveiled a portrait of a restored people, led by a righteous shepherd, walking in humble obedience, dwelling in sacred safety, and basking in the everlasting presence of the Almighty God. The vision of the two sticks, united in Ezekiel's hand, was no mere performance. It was a sacred declaration, a revelation of God's complete intent to restore, unify, and dwell among his people. That unification was not simply political. It was a messianic prophecy, foretelling a future king from the line of David, one who would shepherd the people with righteousness, compassion, and holiness. But deeper still was the promise of spiritual rebirth. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. The peace in this covenant was not just stillness or the absence of strife. It was wholeness, healing, and a sacred restoration of relationship between Creator and creation. This covenant was not theoretical. It was sealed with a divine presence that would never depart. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. God no longer spoke of temples built with stone or clouds and fire as in the wilderness. Now he was speaking of a living presence dwelling within the soul of humankind. This was a foreshadowing of the new covenant, when the Holy Spirit would take up residence in the hearts of believers, guiding teaching and transforming from the inside out. And this presence would not go unnoticed. The nations of the earth would witness the transformation. Then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy, when my sanctuary is among them forever. This promise was never meant for one people alone. It was a call to all humanity, a redemptive plan reaching far and wide, where unity, peace, and divine presence would flow like a river through every believing heart across every boundary and border. The vision of the valley of dry bones and the unification of the two sticks in Ezekiel 37 culminates in a breathtaking promise, the full restoration and eternal unity of God's people under one shepherd. This prophecy finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ, the Son of David, the Good Shepherd, the one who came to unite both Jew and Gentile into one flock under one Lord. In the New Testament, Jesus declares, "I am the Good Shepherd." The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. John 10:11. And again, he says, "I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd." John 10:16. These words are the direct echo of Ezekiel 37, where God promised to gather his people and place them under one shepherd. The Apostle Paul affirms this in Ephesians 2:14-16. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one, and has destroyed the barrier. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, and to reconcile both of them to God through the cross. Through the cross, the wall of division was shattered, and from two peoples, God formed one redeemed humanity, the very unity Ezekiel foresaw centuries earlier. The breath from the four winds that brought life to lifeless bones in Ezekiel 37:14 became reality through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, who now empowers, renews, and ignites the hearts of believers with divine purpose. Ezekiel's vision was never just about bones. It was a prophetic declaration that nothing is too dead for God to resurrect. Not a soul, not a nation, not a world. Even the driest bones can rise again when touched by the word and breath of the Almighty. We are invited to live in that reality, to believe that the same God who raised an army from dust is still moving, still uniting, still breathing life into our own valleys today. The bones were never just bones. They were broken dreams, forgotten prayers, silent hearts waiting to breathe again. But the breath came, and what was dead lived again. This is your promise too. No matter how far you've fallen, how dry your soul has become, the Spirit of God can still find you, still fill you, still raise you. If this spoke to you, share it. And remember, those who trust in the breath of the Lord will rise again. Watch, reflect, believe God will bless you.